All right, everybody. Thank you for joining the Microsoft 365 Virtual Marathon. We have Miguel up next with his 8 p.m. Pacific Time session on what small businesses need to know about Azure AD Premium. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to him. If you have any questions, feel free to post those in the chat window. We'll be sure to take those, and Miguel will be answering them as they come up. Thank you. Good luck, Miguel.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Chris, and thank you everyone for joining me today. Pacific time, it's 8 p.m. So I guess probably some people already had dinner. Some people are maybe just joining us after a nice night. I don't know, but very excited to be here and to be presenting today on Azure AD Premium and what are some of my thoughts and some of the implications that technology can give small businesses. As you probably know, this event is partly organized by the folks who organized the SharePoint conference back in Vegas. This is an event that used to happen every May for the last couple of years. And this is an event that it's near and dear to my heart because it's community driven, and I get to see all my best friends from all different parts of the world in this event. Today we get to do it a little bit different, but still I'm so excited to be here and having the opportunity to see all the different sessions and hearing from Microsoft, hearing from the community, and hearing about best practices and being able to participate with you team. Of course, our sponsors, super important. Thank you for helping us make this event happen. Thank you also for the producers who have been doing an amazing job helping us through the event. And as Chris introduced me earlier, my name is Miguel Tena. Today I work for a company called Lead. We are thankfully a remote first company, and I say thankfully because in a way this is the transition for us from working during the pandemic, if you will. It didn't really change that much how we work because most of us work from home. We work remotely, and I've been doing remote work for about a year and a half. But now with this change, of course, there's definitely things that affected how we do things on a daily basis, but more on the personal side. The kids are here, so it gets a little bit more noisy, of course, but it's from the perspective of doing the work, it didn't change as much. I call myself also a digital workplace crusader because I love to help people work with technology and make life easier through all the great tools that we have in the Microsoft 365 suite and Microsoft technologies in general. I had a chance to participate in Office 12 TAP. This was when something called the Office Ribbon was just released, and the first glimpses of a SharePoint 2007 with InfoPad and things like that came about. So very excited. That was one of my fondest memories, and it immigrated to Canada in 2010. From then on, and before, when I was in Mexico, I've been through in the SharePoint journey and then Office 365, but I've been focused mostly on identity, SharePoint, Teams, and now trying to get a great understanding of the whole suite and find the right solutions. Was born in Mexico City, so I'm also producing the Spanish track. So if you have an opportunity to see some of the sessions in Spanish, we have subtitles as well, and those sessions have been amazing if you have a chance to look at those. You probably already know about Oculus Rift. We are raffling 3 of them, so make sure you get all the information you need. You submit your answers to enter the raffle, and you may be one of 3 lucky winners. As well, we're 10% of the funds raised by the sponsors are going through support community relief. But if you have an opportunity to help others, please do so in the links shown in the slide. People who need it will be really thankful for that. Let's get down to what we came for. So I've always tried to keep an eye on what's going on for small businesses. It's more of a personal thing because where I live in British Columbia and Vancouver in particular, small business is quite big in terms of how many we have and how much of the economy largely depends on small and medium businesses. When we talk about small and medium, Microsoft looks at the small business below the 300 seats. So for a mom and pop, thinking about 300 seats or 300 users sounds like a big business. So still, what I would try to provide is some guidance or some insights of what we have in Azure AD that will help companies maybe as small as five or six to companies that are reaching that 300 limit, but will probably need a few additional things that will help them organize themselves a little bit better, a little bit safer, and overall providing that agility that today's environment, not only for COVID, but for productivity, really needs. So I referenced this post because I saw that the new offering came about, and I was a bit disappointed to see that it was only called a product name change. So it was like, okay, it's more marketing again, and I was not really happy about that. So I was like, okay, really nothing changed until I realized this blog post came about from Niha, and to me, this was the best gift ever for small businesses. Getting that Azure Directory Premium P1 for the business queue is great, and I think it's a great opportunity that we'll see what benefits we can have with that SKU. Today we'll chat about what is Microsoft 365 Business? Is it right for you? What is Azure AD Premium? What are the pain points of the quote-unquote new normal? And where can Azure can help my business, and potentially some key next steps for us to really be aware of what to do next and how to go about using some of these new technologies. So when we look at Microsoft 365 Business, we need to dissect a little bit what that means. And I'm sure if you've seen other presentations today, you've heard quite a few sessions around what the platform means from a productivity perspective. But if you look at Microsoft 365, you have a junction of productivity, device management, and security. And then if you decompose that a little bit, when productivity, you look at Office 365, device management, making sure every device that my company has has the latest updates. I know where it is, and I can manage if that device is up and running correctly. I have that with Intune. And the last part is Azure Active Directory. With that in mind, this security portion is what we will be talking about. Definitely, just talking about Intune will take maybe another couple of hours just to go about all the different aspects of enrolling devices, securing them, etc., etc. So we'll probably touch on a few of those concepts as well, but I think we're in pretty good shape. So what is Azure Active Directory? Essentially, it's our cloud-based identity and access management service. This is the system that will store all the usernames and passwords, all the groups. It'll keep records of all the devices that you have, and will potentially give you the opportunity to control how these groups, how these users, and these devices work together, and how and what permissions or what resources they have access to. If you have Office 365, you already have one. Even if you don't have Office 365, you can get one for free. And if you get one for free, there's obviously a limited set of features, but that set of features will be enough to allow you to secure applications and understand how it works, create your own users, etc., etc. So we'll go through different tiers there. The key part to understand is when you look at Azure AD from the Office 365 point of view, you look at the resources that it can support, such as Azure, Office 365. And if I use other types of applications like Trello, Salesforce, Twitter, etc., I can also use or leverage Azure AD to secure those applications, and that will help me to not have passwords flying around for all these different applications, and I can have them in one place, secure them in one place, and if for whatever reason I need to remove that access from someone, there's one place to do it. If you look at Azure AD for internal resources, it looks more as those resources that are in your corporate environment. In the new era of corporate environment, that will be resources that traditionally sit on the corporate network or that sit in that server room. Small businesses, depending on the size, they probably don't have one, or if they do, they have one of those small business servers, probably with Azure, with Active Directory, a couple applications, maybe a file server here or there. As I mentioned, there's 4 flavors, 4 SKUs for Azure AD. There's the free edition, then there's a Office 365 apps layer or flavor that adds a few additional things, and then Premium P1, Premium P2, which you can get through different ways, but we'll talk mostly, I will spend most of my time in P1. As much as I want to talk about P2, I just won't have enough time to do it. And I also think that some of those features for P2 are not necessarily worth the additional ticket if you for most smaller businesses. Let's look at opportunities for the new normal. One of the first things you think of with COVID and what's been happening is, okay, everyone's working remotely. But really, this is not necessarily something that came out of the blue or that really wasn't happening. As I mentioned, the company I work for today was already a remote first company. The gig economy obviously in place, and this created opportunities in terms of a global talent pool, for example, where I don't need to be constrained by my region or my local reach for talent, for a specific skill set. I can reach anywhere and anywhere. Onboarding, offboarding, of course, if we want to have the best talent, we want that talent to come in, help us out, and eventually if that talent needs to go to a different project or a different environment, he can be that he or she can be offboarded quickly enough. Then we have the idea of just enough access. Of course, we have a lot of documents, a lot of files, access to applications. We want to ensure only the people who are coming in have access to only the pieces they need to do the work. And then, of course, working from anywhere, which is just nature of the beast of remote work. The second part is safeguarding those corporate assets in a geo-dispersed organization. So how do we monitor where my information is going, where my devices and my security, how am I doing? Are there any risks on my users logging in from certain places? Are you using maybe a corporate enabled device that I have more control over? Maybe I won't allow access to certain parts of my data if they're using a non-sanctioned or non-managed device. And then on the other end, how can I make sure that I have visibility into what's happening with the environment? How can I audit, get reports, and secure as needed? One is really reducing the time, what I call time to productivity, which means just getting if I'm onboarding someone new, he or she will be a new employee. How do we get them an asset quickly that they can use a corporate device? If they're maybe a contractor, how do we provision access in a way that's fast, that's secure, and how will we make sure we retrieve that access at the end? The areas where I think where Azure AD can help businesses is ensuring the right people have the right access to apps and information. We'll talk about that in the different areas that we cover. Standardizing for creation of naming and use of groups. So making sure we have rules of the game and the system allows us to have some sort of control and predictability of how we organize the work. Do we create more than one group for a specific project? If so, how do we call them? And how do we make it easy for people to find them? Again, supporting a remote workforce and reducing that friction of potentially not having a friendly neighborhood IT that can come into my desk, show up at the door and help me out with maybe a password reset or a lockdown of my computer, etc. When we look at the core services in Azure, and again, this is like we're at level 1, this is the free tier. We look at single sign-on, we look at user groups. So the list is big. Let's start honing down a few of these concepts. So single sign-on essentially allows me to connect to all these different applications using one set of credentials. This is not something that potentially happens too much nowadays, but still for the main applications that you use on a daily basis. But as you start using cloud applications, if you don't have a single sign-on strategy, you end up with a different username and password for Salesforce, different username and password for MailChimp, and some of those services out there like keychains or LastPass, all of those products help with that. That doesn't necessarily eliminate the need for maybe just having that one username and password that I can reuse across the board, and that grants me that access that I need to different services. Device registration, that definitely helps not only on making sure I know where my devices are at any one time, but also, as you will see, with a feature called Conditional Access policies, will help me identify if the user is on the right device where I can allow more things to happen. Cloud authentication, this really refers to accounts that the username and the password lives in Office 365 or in Azure AD in the cloud, and that they don't necessarily need to connect to another server for making sure that that password is correct. We'll talk a little bit more also about how that connection is different. If you are today, you have your Active Directory on your corporate network. And we have Azure AD Join for desktop SSO. This enables you to, if you have your Windows desktop or your system, in this case, yeah, it has to be a Windows desktop. If it's registered to Azure, it gives you that single sign-on experience from right out from the gate. And last but not least, multi-factor authentication, something that more and more it's very prevalent on services like PayPal and Hotmail and Gmail. All these cloud applications are really encouraging you to do multi-factor. Of course, in the enterprise today, that's basically in businesses, that's a given. I mentioned Azure Join for desktop SSO. I would like to take maybe one level down, as in Inception style, to identify what the differences are between a registered versus a joined device. I won't go fully on this table, but what I would like you to capture is that there are three different models that help you drive the level of access and the level of control that you can have over the device. For example, devices that are not necessarily part of the organization, like a mobile phone or a personal laptop, those, if I start using the device for accessing my email or my files in SharePoint, that device potentially can be added as an Azure AD registered device. This will give me visibility of that device being used. I don't necessarily need that device to be signed in with a corporate credential, but it allows me to SSO to resources like anything that is in the cloud. Once you have a device that's Azure AD joined, this is not necessarily a BYOD device. This is a device that it's provided by the organization, by the business. This gives you that flexibility to do cloud and on-prem SSO, meaning if you also need to connect to internal services, you can also leverage that same single sign-on capability. And also gives you that possibility to manage either using MDM with Intune or to manage the device using an endpoint config manager service. And last but not least, for organizations that today have a little bit more maturity, the option to have the hybrid Azure AD joined and be able to leverage the best of both worlds to do things like group policy, to set up certain settings on the device, and use Intune for maybe other areas of managing the Windows servers and Windows clients. The second part that I wanted to highlight is more around the user and group management. It's true when you spin up your tenant, the first thing you get your first user, and you want to add other users. Of course, one way to do that would be to use the interface to create users, create groups, and start adding them organically. Or if you already have your Active Directory as part of your business, it's sitting on your on the business, on your network, you use Azure AD Connect Sync to bring those identities and create those users on the Azure AD side. This will synchronize the identities. It'll give you that flexibility to choose a variety of sign-in methods, ranging from depending on the criticality of your data, you can decide to either do the authentication on the cloud using a hash of the password if you are synchronizing, or if you're doing pass-through auth, that authentication will happen on-prem. And larger organizations traditionally use something called ADFS, which is Active Directory Federation Services. Definitely a more sophisticated way, but something to consider if you have additional needs to federate with other entities, or if you have very specific scenarios where there's more than one forest, etc., etc. For most smaller businesses, probably ADFS might be overkill, and Microsoft itself is also trying to support as much as possible all the other features of federation, either to apps or to other services in Azure AD. And then finally, the Azure AD Connect Health. It keeps you, if you have ADFS, it helps you to monitor that connectivity to make sure you don't lose that. But because if you do, people who want to have access to your resources are going to have a hard time doing so. Which one you should choose largely depends on your use case. There's a nice decision tree. I can probably provide a link to this in the Microsoft documentation, but this is a good starting point to identify whether you need more sophisticated ways to authenticate with ADFS, or you can use password hash or pass-through authentication. Last bit of the core services that I wanted to highlight is Azure B2B. The service has the capability to allow you to work with other Office 365 clients and other external entities with their own credentials. Meaning, if you are working with a client and you want to share information with them, you can invite them to your tenant, share a link, for example, to a SharePoint site, and they will use their own set of credentials because you trust them and access different sites or resources in your tenant. So very larger conversation around B2B, but know that there's that possibility for interacting with other businesses and not necessarily having to create user accounts for others. We've gone to the free. Next level up, you also sort of get for free if you have Office 365. I just wanted to make a little bit of a difference there. Identity and access management for Office 365 apps. You get this 4 additional things right out of the gate. First one is branding, and branding not necessarily on your SharePoint site on how it looks, but more on the login, logout experience. So if I look at that, there's the classic Contoso example here where they've created a nice background, they have the company logo, and they can do a couple more things to provide a personalized experience. So besides the looks of this, which is a little bit more appealing than maybe a blank canvas, it's also important for your users to identify that this is your signing experience and maybe not another signing experience that maybe they shouldn't be entering their username and password. There's another good opportunity to maybe work around company culture, provide maybe a reminder of our values through some of those graphics to make that feel like, oh, it's the front door to my company, because the front door is now remote. This is now the front door. Self-service password reset for accounts. I won't go too deep in that. If you saw in the previous slide, I had self-service password change for cloud accounts. Difference here is you can change it if you want anytime, but if you forget it, only if you have Office 365, there's a way for you to enable your users to reset the account using self-service. Backed by SLA, this is the first, the free version is not bound to any SLA, so if it goes down, it goes down. The one with Office 365, of course, it's part of that Office 365 suite and is bound to that 99.9 uptime that is part of the SLA. Last but not least is the device write back for two-way communication or two-way synchronization of devices. This comes in handy if you still manage some of your objects or some of your users on your Active Directory. and you still need those devices to flow back if they're joined by Azure AD. And the other way around, if you are using Intune to manage devices, you still need to know about them, and Azure AD would be the way where Intune will find them. 2 flavors to go. Let's talk about premium. Let's keep moving. There's quite a bit on premium at first glance, but let's chop it up a little bit. Password protection. I love this one because out of the box you get the traditional password protections against a big list of common passwords that are well-known pawned passwords that people shouldn't be using, like password 31234, things like Covfefe, all of that good stuff. Custom band passwords takes that to the next level, and there's bound to be some custom keywords in your company, in your organization, that eventually become part of the culture, that eventually become the de facto password. So company name 123 would be a great example that it's not necessarily going to be in the global list of passwords, but that's something that you would add here. Once you have AD Premium, and if you have if you're writing back your passwords to Active Directory, you get that additional benefit also to your Windows Server Active Directory, right? Getting that list of passwords verified. Whenever someone changes their password, it will say you have to be careful. Self-service password management. Again, this extends a little bit more. It allows for that write back to the passwords for on-prem, giving you that flexibility. And you also get a portal for self-service password registration and a portal for password resets for measuring the activity as well. So if people need to be registered for SSPR, meaning they need to have a couple devices registered, or they have special questions they need to answer if they want to reset their password. So all of that is easily tracked using this. The second one is group access management. For group access management, the way this works is if you say you want to provide access for someone to Salesforce, for example, you can either do it directly. You can assign Miguel access to Salesforce. That is one way. You can also create a group, and that group will be assigned an owner. The owner can decide whether Miguel gets access to Salesforce or not. And then that group will be assigned to that resource. This model applies across the board for cloud apps, for on-premises apps. We'll talk a bit about what that means from additional things we need to do. And as well as all the Office 365 stuff, like Azure or Office 365 groups, Office apps, etc. I think it's key to note that if you have groups that today you manage, if you have your Active Directory on-prem, you will have to still manage them from on-prem. But if you have groups in Office 365 or Azure, you manage them in Azure. Except the more traditional distribution list and email-enabled groups, which you would have to either manage to Exchange Admin Center or M365 Admin Portal. Talk a little bit about the types of assignment. You have the direct assignment, the group assignment. Rule assignment is interesting, and this is also a great feature of P1 because I can easily say if I define the users clearly with job title, department, etc., I could have dynamic groups that will in turn say anyone who sits on the sales department has access to Salesforce, and that will happen automatically. That's a rule that it's there, the bucket. People will get assigned to that bucket because their department equals sales. And the last piece, or the last type of assignment, is the external authority. The most traditional way of external authority is the on-prem Active Directory, but you can use other things like Workday, SuccessFactors, and others to populate not only the users, but the rights or the groups that in which they will be assigned to. Application proxy, we spoke a little bit about that, what that means for access to resources on-prem. There are definitely ways where you can negate the need for a VPN and allow for people who are outside of the corporate network to access web applications, web APIs, RD, remote desktops, etc. that you can leverage application proxy instead of that the traditional VPN service. Great advantage to have that connected. We also have Azure AD Premium has Cloud App Discovery. And I think this one is also quite interesting right now in this, this new life of working remotely. Even in corporate space, if you have a larger number of users, you want to know which cloud applications they're using, not only because you want to control that they shouldn't be using other things like, let's say, G Drive or Dropbox, etc., to store their files, but if you identify use cases that are well documented, that make sense for those top applications, chances are you can help to improve or improve the usage or the adoption of those applications by federating or integrating the authentication of that application into with Azure Active Directory. What that would mean, for example, if you notice, hey, there's quite a few people in the sales department, they're using MailChimp, what you can do is provide them with that single sign-on platform. Now, suddenly sales department, anyone can log into MailChimp with the right credentials, but also if you have the need to onboard someone, you don't need to change the password for MailChimp and then send that password to everyone. You just remove that person from the access. Maybe that person changed to a different department, or if that person is disabled, they no longer have access to that service. They never effectively had a password for MailChimp. Looking at, again, my friend Azure AD joined, there's additional things that you can do for the devices. First one is the MDM auto enrollment and local admin policy. So auto enrollment really means that it will enforce that as soon as you join the device to Azure AD, automatically we will enroll the device in MDM. That way, you can quickly start to manage that device and apply the rules that you need to apply. One of those rules that makes a lot of sense is that local admin policy. And that is really helpful. Let's say you have Miguel who lives in Vancouver, buy a computer, he needs to get the computer up and running, he enters, joins it to Azure AD. But who can manage that computer? Maybe only Miguel. That wouldn't be right. You want someone else, like help desk or maybe someone in the local office or the central office to be able to manage that device. That's why you add that local admin there. Then self-service BitLocker recovery, in my opinion, it's a little bit more obscure, that you would need to have access to your BitLocker recovery key. That only happens when something changed in the device, or an update to Windows was not necessarily done in the right way. Particularly, I've only seen it once in a Windows corporate setting, but it's there. And enterprise state roaming. This is a good one because if you use personal devices with Windows 10, if you maybe use a laptop and you have a desktop at home, you're essentially some of your settings, like your theme, your apps that you have installed, they roam as long as you use the same Windows or Microsoft account. Those settings will follow you through any device. This is the same thing, but on the enterprise side, allowing you to change maybe from the desktop to a laptop and still retain those same settings. Awesome. So now we're looking at advanced security and usage reports. This one is interesting because this is not one of those areas where it's on or off. It's more like you get little visibility over things, and as you have maybe a P1 license or a P2 license, you get a little bit more visibility. Take users flagged for risk, for example. If you have only Office 365 free, you only get the list of users who are flagged for risk and risky sign-ins. That's all you get. If you have Azure AD Premium P1, you can also examine some of the underlying risks, right, that have been detected. You can take action, close that. And as you can see in some of the screenshots, it's there. And then Azure AD Premium 2 gives you more details about what exact types of risks are, and allows you to also configure policies that respond to those risk levels. So I think the main difference, if you have that P2, is like it's almost like you set up and forget once you set up those policies. And P1 is a little bit more involved. You need to understand, oh, there's a risky sign in here, there's a user that's flagged for risk, and you manually have to go in and deal with that through the Azure AD console. In terms of activity reports, you get audit logs, really recommended from day one. To get audit logs turned on, there's no cost. Again, the level of detail that you get from a P license from a regular license will potentially change, but it's very helpful to have access to those logs to see any changes that have been done in the environment, or to see any changes or any history of things that have been read or edited or seen in areas like SharePoint or OneDrive, etc., etc. And how you correlate what happened to who made those actions. In the area of advanced group management, I have a few more things, like we talked about dynamic groups. Group creation permission delegation. This is a really fancy name, but it only means that you can allow other people to create groups and manage only a few people that can do it, as opposed to maybe only admins or everyone, which is usually the default. So if you want to control who can create groups and not necessarily give them access to the whole kingdom, this is probably the best way to go. And the second part for more on the governance side, so group naming policy, group expiration. Naming policy is great because I can organize my groups a little bit better. I can give it user attributes. Let's say if I'm in marketing and I create a group, that group will be part of the marketing. It will be automatically labeled as marketing. I could see Chris chuckling over there with Dr. Evil.
That was a good one.
Thank you. And of course, there's a potential for block words. You don't want or need groups that are called CEO, or maybe you want to make sure there's not a specific project name for whatever reason. There's a way to do that. Uh, then you have group expiration. This is sometimes you want groups to expire because you want the information to expire as well for retention purposes. You probably there's types of data that after a certain period of time it's worse to have that than not to have that. That happens in some settings, but in general, if you don't look at the compliance aspect, which that'll be getting to a bigger can of worms, you want to make sure you have a good list of groups, and those groups are healthy, they're active. This has gotten much better because the activity gets, if the groups are active, they just get renewed automatically. You don't have to worry about it. But if the group becomes inactive, the owners of the group or IT or a named email will get notifications when that group is about to expire. Even if it expires and it gets deleted, there's ways around bringing it back in the first 30 days or so. Usage guidelines. So here it's more also around governance. If you want to ensure people are using the groups for the right reasons and they understand how to use them, you can add a link here for adding how to use those groups. Going a little bit faster because I'm looking at the time. And default classification. This is changing a little bit. There's a group classification. That's the old way of doing group classification. There's a new way with information IAP, which is information label protection, something like that. Last area that I want to touch base on is conditional access. So conditional access is that ability to say, based on group, location, device, status, what kind of access I am going to give the user. So if I look at how it works, the traditional model will be, well, you have access because you're so-and-so. But in this new model of granting access, it's not only because I'm Miguel and I have access to the application, but also because I'm using maybe a managed device. And if there's any other things that may be inputs of the risk that I'm incurring by logging in, maybe there's additional traffic, there's other things that Azure AD is detecting about my session that it's not necessarily kosher with letting me in. So those signals are there to either allow, deny, or require additional steps like MFA for me to access my apps and my data. MFA very, as we discussed, classic now, something that it's just part and parcel. In the traditional days of going to the office, sometimes location-based is what made sense, but now with geo-dispersed, it's going to be more about whether the device is managed, potentially the IP address if it has an opportunity to remain static, maybe another way to do it. And then more and more signals and rules are added all the time to conditional access. I'm going to skip over AAP integration. Let's look at SharePoint limited access. Same thing here. You can restrict access to not only all of SharePoint, but maybe some of SharePoint, some certain sites in SharePoint to certain groups based on different conditions. You can also restrict the type of activity. So for example, well, if I'm in the corporate office, I can go crazy with the files, but if I'm outside the office or from an unmanaged device, I can only browse for them. I can only view them in the browser, that sort of thing. Terms of use. Terms of use is more to set up things like, for compliance reasons, you need people to accept a set of legal rules before they can access information. You can present that document here. People will accept or decline, and if they accept or decline, you have ways to track that. And that covers Premium P1, Premium P2. I won't cover today because A, I'm out of time. 2, you need to buy it, so tends to go more around risk event, more automation, more sophistication on who gets access to what, more sophistication on ensuring the right people have access and being able to review who has that access, etc., etc. But if you see some of these things, happy to take additional questions or happy to connect afterwards if you have any questions there. Key next steps. Ensure you have Microsoft 365 Business. It's a great addition. It's not necessarily the enterprise queue, and in a way that's a good thing because you don't need to spend as much money to get all this goodness. And if your company grows, then that's a much better discussion. Leverage key resources to get started. Microsoft has been on a roll since the whole COVID thing started to produce content to help you secure your business, talking about remote work. The highly recommended, the tech community, the small business channel has amazing content. And I have a couple of links here in the presentation that I will be sharing for those, but definitely visit tech community. You don't necessarily need to go on this journey alone. There's obviously partners like To The Lead, partners like there's definitely a lot of people you can talk to anywhere. So happy to direct you if you have any questions on how to get started and how to adopt some of these features to make life easier for your users and keep things as secure as possible in a geo-dispersed environment. And that is it from me.
Perfect. So how can everybody get a hold of you, Miguel?
Best way to do that, I'm on Twitter. I try not to be during business hours most of the time, but lunchtime it's always a good opportunity. I'm under Miguel_Tena. That's the best way to reach me. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm never on Facebook, so don't even bother.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you, Miguel. That was an amazing session.
No problem. Happy to. I hope this was helpful and useful. I know there's. I was highly ambitious, trying to cover a lot of stuff in 50